So good afternoon and welcome to our lecture with Dr. Clemena Antonova, curator of the special exhibition Icons for Our Time, Orthodox Art from Around the World. This exhibition celebrates the 15th anniversary of the museum's founding and explores 15 icons by some of the most important contemporary icon painters. New works by artists from Armenia, Belarus, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Egypt, Georgia, Greece, Japan, Montenegro, Russia, Serbia, the UK, and the US have been commissioned for this exhibition. The exhibition also examines the spread of Orthodox art and three paradoxes, which will be discussed in depth today. Dr. Clemena Antonova is an art historian specializing in the art of the icon. Among her latest publications are her book, Visual Thought in Russian Religious Philosophy, Pavel Florensky's Theory of the Icon, and her contribution, The Icon and the Visual Arts at the Time of the Russian Religious Renaissance. She also guest edited a special journal issue, The Science of Art, Visuality at the Interdisciplinary Crossroads, and is preparing another one, Stories of Art, Alternative Art Histories from Russia. At present, she is the research director of the Eurasia and Global Dialogue program at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. So thank you, Clemena, for being here with us today. I will now turn it over to you. And we will have a Q&A after the lecture. And so I will jump back on when it's time for the questions. Thank you.
Well, Amy, thank you very much for the introduction. And of course, I'd like to thank the audience for their interest in the lecture, but especially in the exhibition that we have all been working on for quite some time. So as you heard from Amy, I'm an academic and a researcher, which can be a very lonely and is a very lonely job. I mean, you don't need company to read, and certainly nobody wants to keep you company if you're going to go to dusty basements to check archives. And against this background, I find that organizing an exhibition is an enterprise of a completely different nature, because it implies and it means working with other people all the time. And the end product relies on the work of all of us. So the artists, of course, but also friends and colleagues who put me in touch with the artists, recommended artists, the people in the museum that I was working with. So as I was telling Amy before we started, at the beginning, when I started working on this project, I kept referring to what I was doing as I'm organizing an exhibition, I'm curating an exhibition. And then I just naturally slipped into we are doing this, we are organizing an exhibition, because so many people were involved in the exhibition that I hope a lot of you are actually going to see. So in other words, curating almost by definition is teamwork. And this is why I'd like to thank especially the people I worked the closest with in the last several months. So at the very beginning, Ken Russell was involved, but especially after that, for the rest of the summer and the last several months, I was working very closely with Amy and Laura, and I'd like to thank you very much for making the whole experience so pleasurable, for being so creative, for giving me ideas, for always participating and coming up with interesting solutions to the problems we had. And I think that at the end of the day, you know, the exhibition is very much the result of all of us working on this project. So thanks a lot. Now, I'd like to start right away with just very briefly explaining what I mean under the three paradoxes of the contemporary icon. I thought actually of putting as a subtitle, you know, the troubles of a curator of religious art, because the paradoxes are very much the result of experiencing, you know, the way in which you organize an exhibition of modern art, and particularly of icons nowadays. So Let me start with paradox number one. So on the one hand, we keep hearing that the icon is a living form of art. And this is obviously the case, you know, icons are still being produced, and this exhibition is a very good witness to the icon being still around with us. On the other hand, we keep hearing that the icon is an art of the past, and different national art historical traditions actually identify different periods of the Middle Ages as the pinnacle of the development of the Orthodox icon. So in this sense, you know, you wonder to what an extent these two views are actually reconcilable and can work together, you know, because if you actually think of the icon as an art which reached its full flowering at some point in the Middle Ages. For example, in Russian art historiography, the high point of the development of the Russian icon is the art of Andrei Rublev at the beginning of the 15th century. So what you are implying is that art before that was sort of developing, progressing to this high point. And art after that, so after the 15th century, however much it tries to achieve these standards, it never quite gets all the way there. So I think that you have these two views and you keep hearing them, and people write books about them. You know, the idea that the icon is part of a national culture, especially in certain societies and cultures in the world, is very much part of nation building and national myths and so on. And you wonder to what an extent you can actually bring these two views can work together, or you have to choose one or the other. So this is the first paradox. The second paradox is that the icon is very much seen as the signature, most important feature of Eastern Orthodox culture. So to use Hegelian language, you know, the spirit of orthodoxy expresses itself in the most powerful way in the icon. This is what, in a way, Orthodox culture has become famous for. At the same time, icons have been produced long before the separation of the churches. So the first icons we have are, let's say, from the 6th century, the icons from Mount Sinai, the monastery of St. Catherine there. And then throughout the Middle Ages, there has been production of icons in Western Europe in a Catholic context, later on in a Protestant context. Probably the most famous example from the medieval period are Italian icons, what is called the Maniera Greca. Maniera means style, and Maniera Greca means the Byzantine style. So in other words, icons have been produced both before and after the end of the Middle Ages, in an Orthodox context, but also in a Catholic, in a Protestant, and nowadays in a secular context. So when we think of the icon as an Eastern Orthodox icon, the question is, what exactly do we mean by that? So this is the second paradox. And the third paradox, which I think in a way is the most interesting to me, and that's why I'm going to spend a little bit more time here, and I hope not to bore, is an idea that lies at the very heart of the problem of the contemporary icon. So the icon is a religious cult image, and as such, it sits quite uncomfortably in a secular modernity. Now, this may sound very abstract, but think about it in very concrete terms. The very institution of the museum is the result of a secular modernity. The first public museums come as a result of the French Revolution, and the separation of religious and secular space. So you have the first art collections, and some of them are religious art, which is taken out of religious spaces like monasteries and churches, and has been taken into public museums. So this is the whole point of a museum, to actually provide a space for art where art is divested from its religious significance. Or at least this is the whole idea. It is actually quite complicated in a way, because when you think about it, almost every time I've been to any of the major collections of religious art, most recently the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow, a few years ago the Byzantine Museum in Thessaloniki in Greece, I notice people who actually pray before icons in the museum. So in other words, that tells me that the very separation, the strict opposition between religious and secular space may be quite overstretched. It may be much more complicated than that. But the question is still there. How do you exhibit religious arts nowadays in the 21st century? What do you expect of? Do you expect the artists to be religious believers, or it doesn't matter? Do you expect people who see icons? Do you believe that actually someone who is not a believer can appreciate an icon in the full meaning that it has, and so on and so forth? So this is in a way the third paradox. And now I'd like to move straight into, in a way, what is the main idea of my talk today. And it is that the icon has become a global form of art. And this is why these paradoxes and problems at the heart of the art of the icon are actually pushed to the fore. They've been there throughout the modern period, but I think that in a way nowadays, at the beginning of the 20th century, they become even more important and evident, and they demand that we engage with them, exactly because the art of the icon has spread, as we say in the title of the exhibition, all over the world. So let me now share my screen. So I'd like to move to, okay, this is a map which actually shows what I call here the Orthodox icon as a global art. The map shows where our artists, the 15 artists that we have, who are presenting works in this exhibition, where they come from. And as you see, it's almost all over the world, not just the Orthodox part of, the heart of Orthodox civilization. You see America, we have icons from Japan and so on. And I would like to use this occasion to show you, to give you a bit of a sense of how we collected these icons, where the painters come from, how we got in touch with them. And also, when I start showing you the pictures, please keep in mind that there is a great diversity of style and artistic treatment, and this is intentional. And it is intentional because I think it is an important aspect of the globalization of Orthodox art. I wanted to focus on and to actually start, the list of illustrations with an image that I find quite striking, which is an icon by our Greek artist. His name is Uresis or Uroš Todorović. He's a very well-known artist from Greece. So you see here, I think what immediately catches your attention is that you almost see a close-up view of Christ's suffering face, and there is no frame. So you have an icon from a place where you expect icons, Eastern Orthodox icons, to come, Greece. Now, let's see the next one. We also have one of our other participants is quite a prominent artist who paints icons, but also secular art, Todor Mitrovic from Serbia. And you have this beautiful icon here of the Last Supper. And I think it is, again, quite an interesting piece of art where you see these changing points of view. I mean, the only way you can see people sitting around a table like that is to change your point of view. You look at the table a bit from the top, you look at the people from the side, something which is actually very typical of the way in which space is constructed in the icon. Now, our third image here is by Alexander Stalinov. He's a Russian iconographer. And again, you see an icon that comes from the heart of Eastern Christian civilization. And I think when you look at this icon, you can sort of see how it inserts itself in a tradition of Russian icon painting. Anyone who's seen the Russian collection of icons at the Tretyakov Gallery would sort of see in what way this icon plays on this Russian style of icon painting. At the same time, we have icons by artists who come from outside the Orthodox world. For example, Avant-Garde, who's probably the best known icon painter from Britain, contributed this beautiful piece of the Archangel Michael. We're going to go to this a little bit later. And there you can see a work by the American artist, Patricia Prebble. And you see here another Archangel Gabriel as an African American. And over here, in a completely different style, taking us back to a much more canonical, traditional form of icon painting, you have an icon coming from Japan. The painter is called Hideko Maria. Maria is the name she took when she converted to Orthodox Christianity. Now, and I think that's probably a good illustration of what I'm talking about here, the globalization of the art of the icon, is the case of the famous Prosopon school. So here we have work, which I think probably the word that comes to mind to describe this icon is majestic. It is a truly majestic image by the founder of the Prosopon school, Vladislav Andreev. And the subject is a very typically Orthodox Christian subject, Holy Sophia, Holy Wisdom. And the painter himself is Russian American, so he was born in Russia. He worked in Russia as an artist for a number of years. Then he immigrated to America that he now calls home. So you see to what an extent we have these mixed identities of the artists and to what an extent literally the icon has spread all over the world. Now, what is something else I wanted to mention to you. When we started collecting these icons, my idea was to, none of the pieces were actually found on the internet or in any other way, but actually getting in touch with people who are experts on iconography or Eastern Orthodox culture, who actually, or who are well-known art critics who put me in touch with artists from Greece or from Romania, or from Russia and from Japan. And then I looked through quite a lot of works and I started selecting pieces which I thought would fit in well with what we wanted to achieve with this exhibition. And all the pieces I chose, you know, we discussed them together with Amy and Laura, and there's a certain thinking behind it, which I think it will come across when you see the exhibition. So, for example, if you look at these two works, Uresi's icon is meant to be seen in dialogue with the piece by Alexander. So you have the Greek icon and the Russian icon. And I think it is clear that the style is completely different. So you have not the same, but quite similar subject. And the artists have approached it in a completely different way. Now, I'd like to read to you what Alexander told me about his approach to this work, to his work. And I think that it is a very good way of addressing the topic of paradoxes in contemporary art. So you see, Alexander says that his work of Christ the Redeemer is meant to demonstrate that the icon does not need to follow the trends of contemporary art, since it has its own logic. It is an art of tradition. Iconography, for Alexander, is a matter of service and ministry rather than self-expression. Now, think about that and compare to what one of our other artists said about her work, Patricia Prebble. She actually says that in her work, she broke with some of the traditional methods and conventions. And while maintaining an orthodox purpose of the icon, she pushed the icon into a modern point of view. So you see that these are two quite different approaches of artists to their own work. And I think that these two approaches very much determine the reason why you go into this exhibition and you actually see very often the same or similar topics dealt with in such a completely different way. Now, let me show you another two works which are also in dialogue with each other in terms of style and treatment and approach to the art of iconography, and which also illustrate the diversity of the style of the icon once the icon becomes a global form of art. So on the one hand, again, you have the Japanese piece by Hideko Maria, and next to it, you have what looks like almost like an avant-garde. You know, I was thinking actually of some works by Natalia Goncharova and the Russian avant-garde from the beginning of the 20th century. You have this sort of quite modernist approach to exactly the same topic, because, you know, what you see here is a very traditional iconography of the Virgin and Child. What is called, it's the Byzantine type of the Eleusa, the mother of tenderness. You see how you have the Virgin Mary with the baby Jesus, and they have their cheeks touching. This is one of the most common and most widespread iconographical types of the Virgin and Child. So the iconography is the same, the subject is exactly the same, and the artistic treatment and the style are obviously very, very different. So I think, again, to go back to what Pat told me when we exchanged some messages about the purpose of iconography nowadays, I think it's very much a matter of how how an artist and an iconographer places himself in relationship to tradition and in relationship to the whole concept and idea of a canon. And also to what an extent they see their own role as an original modern artist. So I wanted now to show you, again, another two works which also illustrate this idea of the diversity of artistic styles. So the first one is an icon by Christopher Gozzi, which belongs to the so-called Ethiopian school of painting. So you see that I think that it is quite striking in terms of the color scheme. And you have this sort of quite almost decorative effect of the icon. It is clearly not meant to be a naturalistic portrait image. The decorative effect, the abstract style is very much in keeping with Ethiopian icons. Now, compare this to a very different type of image that we have in a very different style. So you have here an icon of a contemporary saint by a Georgian artist, David Hidasheli. I think it's a good thing when you cannot properly pronounce the names. It just shows that we have artists from really different parts of the world. So you see this icon is in a way compositional. It is a very canonical image. It looks like many icons that you've seen of saints in churches and so on. At the same time, you have a very effective, realistic portraiture of the saint. So this is what I think is quite interesting to notice here, the great variety of stylistic treatment. Now, I'd like to focus a little bit on David's wonderful icon. I think it's just a beautiful image for another reason, because it also goes directly, it addresses directly the main idea of our exhibition, which is reflected in the title, Icons for Our Time. The preposition for is meant on purpose. It means contemporary icons that in many ways address current contemporary problems. And I think that this is a good example of that. You have a contemporary saint. Saint Grigol Peradze is someone who was quite a famous theology professor who traveled in several countries in Europe. The Second World War found him in Poland, and he was known for his sympathies with other clergymen who were persecuted by the Nazis, also for his sympathy and the compassion he showed towards the Jews. So he eventually ended up in Auschwitz, where he was murdered along with many others. And the story goes, and it could have very well, it could be actually quite true, that he walked into the gas chamber instead of a Jewish man who had a large family. So in other words, we have literally an icon of a contemporary saint. And this icon, in order to understand the icon and in order to understand what's holy about this figure, you really have to know contemporary history. It is an image that directly addresses issues, one of the most horrible and dramatic moments of 20th century history. And that brings me to my next point. Amy, do I have? Yeah, I do have some time.
Oh yeah, you still have plenty of time.
Okay, so this brings me to an image with which I wanted to finish the show of icons for this stage of my talk. And I think it is a very good way of you know, again, addressing the problem of icons for our time. To what an extent an ancient art form that goes back to late antiquity can be used at the beginning of the 20th century to address directly, to engage with problems and issues that are of direct concern to us. And so this is Patricia Preble's wonderful icon of the Archangel Gabriel. And when she painted this icon, obviously you see an African-American man as the Archangel Gabriel. She said that what she had in mind was to directly react to racism, and I quote, in this country. Patricia is American. And I think that you can very much understand this image in the context of, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement and all the debates that have emerged in America, in Western Europe, and in the rest of the world about racism, endemic racism that continues to plague our societies. And I think that what this brought to my mind was quite a famous case. There was a competition in 1999. It was called Jesus 2000. And the work which actually won the competition is a work by, sorry, let me just see the name of the artist. I'm very bad with names. So a work by Janet Mackenzie, which was called Jesus of the People. And it again shows a figure of Jesus as an African-American man. So this was in 2000. And very recently, we were reminded about this work because a copy of it was put at the memorial of George Floyd in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. So I think that in a way, you can see how religious art, and in this case, specifically the art of the icon, has the ability to address, comment on, contribute to debates on problems and issues and concerns that we have nowadays. And so this brings me back to some of the questions which came up in the context of my work on this exhibition. Because you see, when we spoke at the very beginning about the three paradoxes of the contemporary icon, they're not just theoretical issues. Once you organize an exhibition, you start organizing an exhibition, there are a lot of practical problems that come out of these paradoxes. So, for example, if the icon is a medieval form of art, how are we supposed to experience it? Do we experience an icon in the way we experience a Greek temple? So we look at an icon as part of the history of art. This is the sort of art that people produced in the Middle Ages, mainly in Byzantium and in the Byzantine world. Or do we think about it as a contemporary form of art which can achieve something which is quite different, directly engage with aspects of our culture and in a way visually comment on them? So if we think of the next question, if we think of the icon as a living form of art, it means that it is constantly evolving, transforming, changing. So in this sense, how does an icon keep to a canon? How, if you have a canon which was more or less established in the medieval period, how does a modern contemporary artist engage with this canon? Then another question. If we think of the icon as the main feature of Eastern Christian civilization. What does that mean in terms of the experience of the viewer of an icon? Does it mean that you will miss something of the meaning of the icon if you're not well acquainted with this culture, but also with the theology of the icon? Also, do you actually expect an artist to be a believer in order to produce a religious image? Oh, this doesn't matter. So, just to open a bracket here, one of the things that actually surprised me in the process of working on this exhibition was I got in touch with several painters, and some of them offered me works which were quite nice works, but they weren't the sort of works that would fit into this exhibition. So I basically told them that, unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to include their works. And then their response was, oh, but you have chosen the work of someone who I know is not even a religious believer, and I am a religious believer. And I don't think that this was meant in a bad way. I think that it was meant in the sense that it is very often seen that it is expected of an artist or of an iconographer and someone who creates icons to actually be part of this religious world of the icon. So should he? Is that what we expect or not? Or she? Because some of our artists are, of course, women. So then, another question. Think about Russian avant-garde paintings from the beginning of the 20th century. There's been quite a lot of work recently, and very often the religious work of painters like Malevich, Natalia Goncharova, Mikhail Larionov, and so on, that were directly borrowing compositional schemes, color relationships, various artistic ideas from the art of the icon. So very often these works have been described as icons. There is actually a book by Andrew Spira, which I think is an excellent book, and it is called The Avant-Garde Icon. So for the author, these works are icons. Now, at the same time, a lot of these artists, like Malevich, for example, were either atheists, quite openly or even militantly atheists, outspokenly irreligious or even anti-religious. So can someone who does not identify with the religious meaning of the icon, can he produce an icon that for us or for someone has a religious significance? I think that all these are actually questions that are difficult to answer. And I don't think that in this exhibition, it has been even my aim to take sides and, say this is what we expect and this is how things should be. What I wanted this exhibition to do is actually to open the space. And I think that a museum is a very good space for having such a conversation where we can talk about these issues. I think in a way that just like many of the most interesting books you read are books that don't come up with solutions to problems, but ask very interesting questions and open the space for a dialogue and a discussion. And that these works are sometimes much more valuable than works that provide easy solutions to various problems. So I think an exhibition, at least I think of our exhibition in such a way that it is not so much about giving an answer to these issues and questions that I think naturally arise, but it is very much about talking about them and also thinking about them as something which is quite important. And it is important because we are all of us, I guess, all of us who are here, we have an experience of, a museum of religious art. And this is what it means to have a museum of religious art at the beginning of the 21st century. It is a global art, and it is an art which is very paradoxical, I think, in many ways. And being paradoxical means it poses various practical questions to the curators, the organizers, people working in the museum to think of how to present this art in the museum space, but also to the viewers and to the artists as well. So I think that these, all of them, interesting questions which in a way we have to face if anytime we go to see religious art in a museum. So let me see, there's something else I wanted to mention here. I thought that, I was thinking recently, I was reading about debates on architecture, church architecture, and I think that they relate very much also to icons. There's a whole debate among architects of churches nowadays. What should be the architecture of a new church in the 21st century? So should it be, should it follow an architectural style that is very much in the spirit of modern contemporary architecture? Or should it look back as a religious building to prototypes in the Middle Ages? And recently I came across a book that was, actually it was quite amusing in a way. The author is Michael Rose, and the title of the book is Ugly as Sin. And this refers to the modern ecclesiastical architecture. And the subtitle is Why They Changed Our Churches from Sacred Places to Meeting Spaces, and How We Can Change Them Back Again. So the author is saying here that the most beautiful church in the Catholic world is Notre Dame in Paris. So every time we have new churches in a Catholic context, this is the model, this is what we should try to do, this is what we should follow. So this is one point of view. And then another point of view is that you very often, he may see a lot of modern architectures ugly as sin, but they have been extremely successful projects of churches in the last several decades that look very, very modern, but also have been able to convey a genuine religious meaning to people who go there. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that there's still very much a debate going on around many of these questions. And I don't think that with this exhibition we're going to solve these problems, but I think it is interesting to think about them and to talk about them. A few months ago, with some colleagues in Germany, they're part of the Russian Art and Culture Group, we organized a conference which was called The Problem of Religious Art in Modernity. And, it was a conference running over 2 days. And, there were scholars that came up with such a wide array of views on many of these questions I'm mentioning now. And this tells me that, in a way, we're now at the moment when this discussion is coming up. And I think that viewers to the Museum of Russian Icons can also see themselves not just as viewers of an exhibition, but as being part of this conversation about, the role and the function of the icon in our time. So I think that it is time for me to shut up and to let you actually ask some of your questions, because I think that this would be the interesting part.
Thank you, Clemena. You touched on this in your talk, but really the goal of this exhibition is to create a dialogue, and so we want visitors to go in, actually, I would say, leaving with more questions than they have answers, and really consider the icon in this new light, in this new context. Rather than a historical context or a religious context that they might gather, that they might get when just visiting our permanent collection. So if folks would like to use the Q&A function on Zoom, that would be great. That would be easier for me. But Clemena, I wonder if you could talk about overall the layout of the exhibition. So we saw a number of the portrait icons, but we didn't see images of the narrative icons in the exhibition. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit, especially for those folks who will be going to see the exhibit in person, talk about the layout and sort of your intent behind the arrangement.
Okay, Amy. Well, thank you for the question, because I think that this is something that I can imagine that people who will go to see the exhibition would be interested in. I just didn't have time to go into it, but I think it is, it is something important. Basically, the icons that we have fall into two different categories in a way in terms of subject matter. So on the one hand, we have what I called portrait icons. So these are like icons of saints, like the one you can see right now of the Archangel Gabriel. I mostly showed you these icons because I'll be giving a talk in February, and I'm going to use the narrative icons for this talk. So we have the portrait icons on the one hand, and then we have 6 narrative icons. And I think that it is important for visitors when they enter the room of the exhibition to actually look at the narrative icons, the icons that tell a story, in a way in the right order, because they're meant to be read as a narrative. And I think this is why I think it's a good question you're asking me that, because I think that it's not all the same whether you look from left to right and so on. I mean, there's a certain way in which you can look at these icons so that they fall into a visual narrative. Literally, one of the views of the icon already in the Middle Ages, in the Byzantine theology of the icon, was that the icon served the role of the word. You told the story instead of through words, through images. And here we have 6 icons that tell different, that focus on 6 different episodes from the New Testament narrative. And I think, in a way, I want to give the visitors a clue, because what I wanted to achieve with this visual story was basically to tell the story, to show how images can tell stories in a different way from texts. Images can focus on episodes in such a way that they change the story. So the New Testament story that we have here focuses on the positive, joyful message of the New Testament and the appearance of Christ. As you will see, on purpose, none of the icons actually are part of what is, strictly speaking, the passion of Christ. You don't see the crucifixion. You don't see Christ being humiliated and mocked and all that. And this is on purpose. I wanted to give a sense, and I think that this is actually quite consistent with the theological reading, a certain theological reading of Christianity, that Christianity is also about sending a message of joy, So that's why these stories focus, that the episodes focus on the transfiguration of Christ, on Christ being baptized and so on. So all these are all the moments of compassion and joy and the saving grace of God. So this was more or less the whole idea behind the layout.
Great. Thank you. So we have a couple questions coming in. Let's start off with this one. Mary is asking, have the artists you discussed also done other modern icons? And I guess for me to add to that a little bit, could you discuss in a little bit more depth the background of some of these artists? Because what I found so interesting is many found icon painting a little bit later in life.
Well, I think that this is also a very good question, because I think it has to do again with, our contemporary context. In the medieval context, iconographers had a very similar background. Most of them were monks. All of them were obviously religious, like everybody else was religious in a pre-modern society. So I think that it is in a way quite interesting to see the wide backgrounds of the great difference of backgrounds of our artists and how they came, as you say, in different ways to the icon. Some of the iconographers can be described as iconographers in the sense that they focus mainly or exclusively on painting icons. But we also have, for example, our representative from Russia, Alexander Stalinov. I don't know if he paints any other work, but he's certainly known exactly for his icons. Now, at the same time, Todor Mitrovic, our painter from Serbia, Patricia Prebel, they paint icons, they do religious paintings, but they're also known for doing other types of work as well, secular painting. So basically, we also have quite interesting cases of people who have worked as painters and artists for a number of years, and then quite late in their life, they sort of in a way discover the icon, and they describe it in such a way that it is like a personal discovery. And again, I think that this is again interesting, because some of them say that they discovered the icon because they were impressed by the art of the icon and all the possibilities it opened for their work as artists. But some of them discovered the icon because they became interested in the religious meaning of these images. So it's religion and an interest in theology that brought them to the icon. Well, this is not the case with everyone. A lot of people, some of the artists, probably a minority as a matter of fact, and may not be even that much interested in the religious dimension. They describe themselves as being much more interested in the artistic possibilities that the icon presented. So.
Great, thank you. So I think that's a nice segue into actually our next question. So Anatole is wondering, can you tell us how the new styles of icon art are received by the more traditional communities of icon makers, such as those who work in traditional Orthodox monasteries in Greece and Russia, for example?
Well, that again has been, something I discovered in the process of work. I've encountered different reactions before, but now, while working on this exhibition, I saw more and more of that. And, I think that when you organize an exhibition of religious art, it is different from any other type of exhibition, because it is quite a sensitive topic for many people. Not everyone is religious, but there are a lot of people who are religious and care about religious art in a much more, how shall I say, a deeper and more passionate way. They don't see it just as art. And in this sense, I think that I've seen quite a lot of, how shall I say, I sense when I speak to some people that they're actually quite unhappy because they see a work of art that doesn't follow the canon. So for them, from a more traditional conservative point of view, they become almost offended. And, someone who I have a great admiration for, who's, I think, well known to some of you, Richard Temple. He's one of the great collectors of icons in Britain and actually in the world. I've been to his place in Nottingham, and he's extremely, extremely knowledgeable. When I discussed with him some religious works over the years, which I saw as icons, he said, but this is, Clemena, what you're showing me is not an icon. This is a religious painting. It is a painting of a religious subject, but it's not really an icon. So, this is one point of view. I think it's completely legitimate. On the other hand, I also have a lot of sympathy with a different point of view that says, yes, I depart from the canon, but I still believe that my work keeps to the spirit of the art of the icon. So it's a different way of seeing your art and seeing yourself as an iconographer. And again, that's why I think that there is something paradoxical about that, because these positions cannot be very easily reconciled.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this question sort of goes along with the last one. Amy is commenting, traditionally icons have not been signed because the focus was never meant to be on the artist. Is the prominence of today's artist evolving how we think of sorry, I'm just working through this wording. Is the prominence of today's artists evolving how we think about the artist in modern iconography?
Well, this is another excellent question, because it goes to the heart of what we've been talking about and what I'm really interested in this exhibition achieving. In traditional icon painting, throughout most of the Middle Ages, most icons were not signed, exactly as, our participant here says, because the individual person, the painter himself, was not important. What was important was the icon itself. Nowadays, all the works we have, and generally almost all the icons that are being produced, are signed, and the artist usually wants to be known as being the author of this book, of this work. So actually, I don't know anyone who produces icons that are not signed. I'm sure there are probably such people, but it would be extremely unusual in a modern context. Because, the very concept of a modern artist, and it has to do with what we talked about, the project of secular modernity. It has to do with the whole idea of the role of artistic genius and the creator. And it's very much about the individuality and the person of the one who's creating the icon. So, again, it's a matter of how you think of this very strong emphasis on the person of the creator and the icon, which is supposed to be a cult object, quite remote from any considerations of who painted it and so on. Though even in the medieval period, I have to say, I don't want to go into details, but just think the very fact that, there's such a focus in Russia on Andrei Rublev, or later on, we know in the 16th and 17th centuries of artists in Cyprus. Of course, this is different because it's sort of the Renaissance period, but the 15th century in Russia is proper Middle Ages. But you still have this sort of striking artist who achieved fame and who became an authoritative figure in his own time. So he became known, and works that were painted by him would actually have were considered to have much more power than works painted by just anyone. So in other words, yes, it is a very interesting question that you produce, even from the most conservative point of view. You could ask the question, if you're just producing icons in the way that canonical art demands, why do you sign them? You know?
Absolutely. So it's a couple minutes past 2, so I would like to wrap up. But I think we'll end with this question. So given the great diversity of icons, can there be a singular definition of the icon that all of these icons can share?
Well, that is
a question.
that is the question. You know, I think in a way, when I was speaking about the 3 paradoxes, all these paradoxes can be brought to one major problem, and this is the definition of the icon. How do you define an icon? And I think, can there be such a definition? I think that generally for everyone who works on the art of the icon, there is such a definition, you know, but you will see that there are several definitions going about. Now, I can tell you my own definition. For me, for an icon to be a genuine icon, it has to convey presence. So if you have an icon of Christ, or like here we're looking at the Archangel Gabriel, an icon is supposed to be not just a sign of the Archangel Gabriel. An icon actually conveys the idea that the Archangel Gabriel in some way, and this is a way which is very well defined by Byzantine theology, in some way is present in his image. So the prototype is in the image. So this would be my first, in a way, requirement for an image to be a true icon. And the second one is something I'll be talking more about in February. It's actually not just my idea, it's probably an idea that comes from Russian historiography on the icon, that in the icon you have a certain construction of space, which is very typical of iconic art, which you don't have in other forms of art. So what is called reverse perspective. So I would say the idea of presence and the construction of space are the 2 requirements that I would have for an icon. But as I said, there are other people who work on the icon and they would define an icon in a different way. There would be much more conservative definitions that would tell you that an icon is an image that follows a canon, which is very well established, quite well known. And if it deviates from this canon, it is not an icon. Now, I don't personally think so, but I have respect for this view.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Clemena. What a note to end on. And for those of you who are in attendance, so Clemena will be, she mentioned this lecture in February. Please keep an eye out on our website for an announcement for this program and information on how to register. It will also be in our upcoming newsletter that should hit your mailboxes around, I would say, end of November, early December. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Clemena, for the wonderful lecture.